under the heading Statements by Ministers, and it has to do with the impact of COVID-19 on our local labor market, as well as its impact in particular on the hospitality sector. And I also would want to touch on the matter of the severance payment claims that have been made to date. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic has left no one in the Federation unscathed, and it would have also, from the time we would have announced the first 2 cases on March 25th, 2020, would have put us in a situation where a decision would have been made to close our borders in the interest of preserving lives, as well as to control the spread of infection, etc. As a result of the border closures, one would have expected that if it was one sector that would have been affected most heavily, it would have been the tourism and allied services sector, especially given the significant contribution that the sector makes to our overall economy. Now, we would have also found ourselves in a situation where we would have gone into a state of emergency, in which we are still under. And as a result of that, over several iterations since that state of emergency went in place, we would have been operating with a set of regulations, including but not limited to those meant for us as individuals to protect ourselves, protect others, and to save lives. These would include, of course, wearing of masks, which is now mandatory, social and physical distancing, and the practicing of proper hand hygiene. As a result of these business closures, we would have found ourselves, and I say we, meaning from the standpoint of the Department of Labor, since I now have the responsibility for that portfolio following the June 5th general elections, that we would have been confronted with the impact of the pandemic insofar as displacement among workers would be concerned. And as a result of that, from around March of 2020, a number of entities would have gone ahead and laid off their staff. Some of them include the St. Kitts Marriott, Royal St. Kitts Hotel, and the Park Hyatt, a number of manufacturing entities, etc. Within 12 weeks of the layoffs that would have taken place, according to the Protection of Employment Act, it also means that workers would then have been eligible to enter into a phase of being able to apply for severance payments. The severance payment fund regulations clearly state that after 12 weeks of an individual being laid off, several things can happen. One, that the employee receives a termination letter indicating that things have not turned around and we now have to part company. Or an alternative can take place whereby the employee is recalled for employment under whatever conditions may be necessary. And however, if that is the case, then employment will have to be guaranteed for that employee for at least 13 weeks going forward. Now, based on the number of claims that we are seeing being filed thus far, there are some just under 800 claims for severance payment that have been filed. Of that number, 309 of them are for Marriott employees. We have 112 that should be coming from the Park Hyatt, and of course just under 90 from the Royal St. Kitts Hotel. And over the course of the last week or so, we are expecting claims to be filed for some 400 workers from the Four Seasons Resort. In addition to these claims, there have also been claims made for the long service gratuity. Some 21 claims have been made thus far. And for purpose of public information, I should indicate that the long service gratuity would have started somewhere around 2014, and by the previous administration, to be exacted out of the same severance payment fund without due capitalization, and the eligible beneficiaries would have been, and still are, manufacturing workers and workers in the hotel and allied services sectors. Some of this data would have been presented at the Prime Minister's press conference by way of answers from journalists on Tuesday of this week, but it doesn't hurt to repeat the data. So if I can just go over, we have just under 800 claims that have been made. Of that number, the biggest portion has been from the Marriott Group for 309 of those claims. and 21 claims have been made for the long service gratuity. I should also state at this point that an individual by law cannot apply for long service gratuity and still for severance pay, because both benefits are coming from the same fund. However, I should also add, Mr. Speaker, for the general information of the public, that over the past several weeks, the government would have engaged in a number of consultations with displaced workers in the hotel sector. Thus far, the Department of Labor would have had 3 such consultations, and these consultations were with the St. Kitts Marriott Resort, which had to be done in 2 groups, considering the sheer size of the staff and to meet social distancing rules. And those 2 meetings would have been held on the 14th of July, and it was an opportunity for workers at the Marriott to be given a voice, to hear their concerns, and for them to ask questions, because in that particular instance, they would have been written on or about the 23rd of March, indicating their layoff, and by the end of June, beginning of July, they would not have been subsequently written to or formally communicated with in any manner concerning their status. So this meeting, which was brokered by the Honorable Prime Minister and me, would have been done at our request and accommodated by the management of the Marriott to give those workers a voice to express their concerns. And then subsequently to that, a process had been put in place over the course of 3 or 4 days for them to come into the Department of Labor using the community center at Victoria Road for them to begin the process of filing their claims. Also, on the 14th of July, the Honorable Prime Minister and I would have met with the Royal St. Kitts Hotel staff at the request of the hotel management, which is different from the case with the Marriott, and that meeting was also amicably held. Similar concerns would have been raised, and it was an opportunity for the staff to express their concerns. And as I noted earlier, the total number of staff that would have been affected was just about maybe 88 or 89 members of staff in that particular instance. And then just yesterday, there was a meeting held at the Four Seasons Resort, and this meeting was the direct result of a written invitation that was sent to the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Labor by Mrs. Yvette Thomas Henry, the Regional Vice President and General Manager. The letter was sent to us on the 22nd of July, requesting a meeting with the staff, because obviously she would have noted that prior discussions would have been held with the Marriott and I guess at the same time the Royal St. Kitts Hotel, and she wanted her staff to be equally able to avail themselves of a discussion with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Labor to discuss their own concerns. Now, I should at this juncture point out that the original meeting should have been held on the 29th of July, but this had to be cancelled because, as we may recall, that same day we would have been notified by NEMA about the pending impact of Tropical Storm Isaias. So that meeting was postponed and then held yesterday. And as noted in her letter, the intention of the meeting was to give the workers an opportunity to ask questions and to clarify any issues they have, considering the fact that a loss of an employment is obviously a point of anxiety, and as such it would then provide an opportunity to have questions asked. As a result of the nature of the meeting being requested, we would have been accompanied at that meeting by the Labor Commissioner, Ms. Shernell James. That meeting was a very amicable discussion, and it was beneficial to all concerned. We, as a government, would be willing to continue on that trend in terms of consultations with other workers around the length and breadth of the Federation, because we do recognize that COVID-19 is unlike any other exogenous impact on our people than before in living history. And as a result of that, we would want to be in a position to provide information about employment, economic impact, etc., and in terms of giving some measure of comfort as to the avenues of assistance that are available to displaced persons under this current dispensation. Before I close, Mr. Speaker, I should also indicate that yesterday a meeting was also held with the National Tripartite Committee on International Labor Standards. And for the benefit of the public, I should indicate that this tripartite body is made up of representation from labor administration, i.e. the Department of Labor, the private sector as workers' representatives, and also as employers' representatives rather, and also workers' representatives, better known to us as unions, who represent the interest of workers. The meeting would have been the first one that would have been convened since the closure of our borders and the beginning of the impact by COVID-19. The agenda items that were discussed at this meeting, which I would have called as the Minister of Labor, my first meeting with them, would have included the following. 1, the status of the Severance Payment Fund, the actuarial review that was recently commissioned by the Department of Labor, given to a Canadian firm, Moen Chappell, who had already done a similar exercise on the Social Security Fund. And of course, we would have also looked at the introduction of an unemployment fund to be managed by Social Security. To the best of my knowledge, there is perhaps a draft piece of legislation that is in hand with Social Security, which will now become the subject of an assessment, public consultation, etc., and then eventually a submission will be brought to Cabinet, and ultimately a decision will be made as to whether or not to give parliamentary cover to that type of coverage, which we think in this present environment of uncertainty in terms of the economy and loss of jobs, it presents yet another avenue for assistance for workers who are displaced. And the final agenda item that would have been discussed yesterday would have been the status of the draft Labor Code, which has spanned several administrations, starting with the Labor Administration, and then into the first term of this government, and now this present term. And it is the view to bring closure to this matter within the next several months, go through a process of consultation before it is brought to Parliament. And essentially what the Labor Code does is to update all of the pieces of legislation that we have in front of us and create what, for want of a better term, would be a compendium of laws relating to labor issues within the Federation. Another meeting of the Tripartite Committee is expected within the next 2 weeks, once we have the bulk of these documents in hand and can begin the process of deliberations on same, with the ultimate goal of presenting our findings to the Cabinet. I should also state, as one last note, that as of Monday, next Monday, the Labor Department will be located on the second floor of Neville's Eatery on the Camps Main Road. The Labor Department has been housed for about 2 years at Victoria Road in the building owned by Amory Enterprises, and for a number of reasons, relocation has become necessary, including the fact that for social distancing purposes, the building has been found to be in violation with COVID-19 protocols, because we have some maybe 36 members of staff in a space that is less than 1,200 square feet. There's also a public health concern in that only one lavatory is available for those numbers of staff, which is grossly insufficient. So as of Monday, the unit will be located at Neville's Eatery. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your indulgence.